Here we go. Roll.
Hey, it's me.
She's a former mayor. They're a former evangelical pastor with dissociative identity disorder. These two like to talk about the topics you're not supposed to talk about. They might cause you to perspire just a bit, but they'll definitely make you inspired. Let's talk religion and politics, and what spirituality and emotional well-being look like in a post-evangelical world. This is Paul and Ashley on Evangelicalish.
All right. We all need each other to get through the next 2 to 3 weeks. So here we are.
Yeah.
Because there's something big coming up. But welcome to Evangelicalish. We do have a great guest. One of the people you call one of the 5 most interesting people in the world.
Last week I said top three.
Okay.
And then I was afraid that might have been a slight exaggeration. So I changed it to 5, but still that's really high because I talked to a lot of interesting people. So I'll introduce Joaquin properly in just a moment. But yeah, I'm super excited. There are very few people that I'd want to talk to, like whatever we are 10 days before the election, than this person. This person has so much insight and just kind of absorbs all the stuff and then like represents it in a way that's very easy to follow and interesting. And I think folks are going to love hearing from Joaquin Alvarado.
Well, and it's good that you're upright tonight because you had a trip to Mexico City and your return did not go well.
And that freaking packs a punch. Let me just say. I go to Mexico.
Was it Montezuma's revenge? I hope that's not
clearly.
A politically incorrect statement.
I know it probably is at this point.
Probably
not
is.
Something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I go to Mexico City. I'm at a conference. I'm at the Hilton Reforma, which is like, in the downtown area, like totally mainstream. I only eat conference food. I drink bottled water. And I'm just telling you at 4 a.m., this was a week ago, Friday, 4 a.m., boy, Montezuma was raging. And I was like worried, how am I going to get on this plane and get home today? And then I thought, oh God, it was food poisoning. It'll be fine in like 24 hours. No, like 8 days later and 1 round of antibiotics later, am I able to sit here with a pleasant look on my face?
Yes.
Would not have been possible even a couple days ago.
And then somehow I got sympathy Montezuma's revenge.
You did, which I don't even think that's a thing.
I don't know if it's a thing, but I got it.
Somehow, like, because I mean, is Montezuma's revenge contagious? Don't you have to like ingest the thing?
I would think so, but one thing I do know is it's a good weight loss program.
I know this is true. I was like half thinking I should just call my doctor and say I'm ready for my like every 2-year colonoscopy right now. Let's just book it because I don't want to. I've just basically prepped for 100 colonoscopies, but the problem is I'm totally current. I don't need one. So
wasn't there a thing like in the 90s where people were like getting tapeworms?
Well,
so they could lose weight.
And we know from watching Real Housewives, hello, are we not all watching every cast? They do colonics and stuff like down in fancy areas like Southern California.
So the big thing for my week is I ended up on the fundy side of social media and
for people who may not know, like me, because I only just heard this word. When you say fundy, you don't mean fun. You mean
fundy is short for fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And every once in a while the algorithm hits and I get on the fundy side. And I had a video about talking about dealing with mental health issues. And all of a sudden, I just had tons of people showing up on my page saying, you don't have mental health issues, you got a demon. And we need to exercise the demon. And you're a false teacher and you're going to hell. And so I've been dealing with that all week with really wonderful, loving Christian people.
Honestly, I'd rather have Montezuma's revenge than be on the fundy side of Facebook for even 5 minutes. Yeah, you were telling me about that earlier, and it was like, you're like, somehow I ended up on Christian Facebook. I'm like, is there a Christian Facebook that I don't know about? And you're like, no, I just mean the algorithm like took me into the like Alice in Wonderland of Christian fundamentalism. And I was like,
Straight
oh,
down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
That is a dark hole. You do
It
not want to go there.
it is a dark, dark hole. But where we do want to go is talking to our guest.
I'm super excited. Let's bring on
Oh,
Joaquin
wait, I have to do the
Alvarado.
read. I have to do the read.
Oh, yes.
Sorry,
Oh,
my
right.
mistake.
See, we are new to this. We are now part of
Yes.
a podcasting network, and we need to promote this network for a few minutes.
The network, and then we promote individual shows in it. So tonight,
Okay.
I'm supposed to tell you or ask you, I guess, are you tired of mainstream religious podcasts that dodge the real questions? Tune into Heretic Happy Hour, where we tackle the burning questions, not people, with our main show every Tuesday, which features panelists like Rainn Wilson. Ooh, Rainn Wilson.
Oh, we
Wow.
love Rainn Wilson.
David Bentley Hart, Lisa Sharon Harper, Bart Ehrman, and many more. A bonus show every Friday and a live stream every Sunday in the Heresy After Hours Facebook group. We're here for all the faith seekers ready to challenge the status quo. So subscribe now wherever you get your podcast and join the conversation that's redefining faith. That's Heretic Happy Hour.
That actually sounds like a really good podcast. Like that is
Yeah.
legit. They are getting legit guests. But you know who they don't have listed on their guest list
Correct.
is Joaquin Alvarado.
They do
And
not.
we here at Ish will be the first to introduce Joaquin Alvarado to this world of deconstructed Christians that go on social media and
The rabbit hole of deconstructed
yes,
Christian podcasting.
and like lick our wounds from being called demon possessed by our friends and family at Thanksgiving. So
Yeah,
Joaquin,
that's a lot.
welcome.
Yeah, hi. On that note, hello.
On
How
that
are you
note,
guys?
we're good. And you're joining us, it looks like, because I'm on a lot of calls with Joaquin. So I think I know that you're joining us from your home in Oakland.
This is Oakland, California. Yes,
Yep.
hello.
And if you don't mind, and if it wouldn't embarrass you, I want to read your bio because I want folks to know the breadth and the depth that you're bringing to us today. Like, it's kind of a big deal that Joaquin's with us. So everyone, here we go. Joaquin is the founder of Studio To Be, which is a media production and consulting firm dedicated to journalism, storytelling, and community-based impact. Prior to Studio To Be, Joaquin served as CEO of the Center for Investigative Reporting until September 2017. That's when Joaquin and I met. Before joining the Center for Investigative Reporting, he was Senior Vice President for Digital Innovation at American Public Media and founding Senior Vice President for Diversity and Innovation at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. He's also been a strategic consultant for many learning media companies and nonprofits, including Microsoft, Univision, NBC News, the Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the James B. McClatchy Foundation, all incredible organizations. His recent work with Microsoft's Journalism Initiative is available on the Microsoft Journalism Hub. In 2007, he launched Coco Studios, an early VR media collaboration platform for fiber and mobile networks. Alvarado was the founding director of the Institute for Next Generation Internet, which launched in 2005 from San Francisco State. He holds a bachelor's degree in Chicano Studies from UC Berkeley. I could ask you about my Montezuma's Revenge, and an MFA from the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television, which is just incredible. A veteran of many nonprofit boards, he currently serves on the boards of Consumer Reports, the James B. McClatchy Foundation, Rebuild Local News Coalition, Aurora Sentinel Community Media, and 826 National. He's the co-author of the 2-volume Contemporary Chicana and Chicano Art, which you can find at Bilingual Press 2002. Joaquin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, that was a lot to read. Thank you, Ashley. And thank
You're
you for
welcome.
keeping me in your top 5. I want to be in your top 5 forever if I can.
Thank you.
Make
Yeah. And may I say, Oakland holds a special place in my heart for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is it's one of 6 cities in California that will not prosecute for possession of mushrooms. And so I had my first psilocybin journey in Oakland.
In Oakland? Well,
Yeah.
this is also many things I love about this city. And it's been many, many kinds of things over its history as a community. But it was the terminus of the transatlantic railroad. So it actually ended in Oakland. It didn't go across the bay on the water. Yeah, it ended in Oakland. So this connection between many different worlds, many different peoples, it has a special anchor point in Oakland, and we're also known for breaking new ground in many different respects. So Yeah, a lot to be proud of in this place I call home.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's get down to it while you're here. We were talking about how we need each other for the next few weeks. We've got this election coming up, in case nobody's aware, and we just thought you would be a wonderful person to give some perspective. What should we be preparing for as election day and whatever is behind it comes? Is it going to be a complete meltdown as a society? Do we need to get ready to move out of the country? Is civil war at hand, or are we overreacting? What's your, from what you know and all your ties
Yeah.
to journalism, what do you see coming up?
Well, I wouldn't leave. It's our country, so I wouldn't give it up. So that's one. Also, it's really, you can do like a 6-month visa. So if you want to do some traveling, you have the opportunity.
Okay.
I've been trying to think about what perspective is most helpful to me, honestly, because there's obviously an enormous amount of stress, and there's a lot of pressure. People are under a lot of pressure right now, and there's an enormous amount of advertising also, right? And as we know, advertising works, and it really works in a social media context, where it operates on rules that are not as regulated as just on traditional broadcast or cable, right? So we have really bizarre chemistry, in our consumption of media and messages in this country right now.
And we know that the Russians are adding to that, and the Chinese.
Well, anybody can buy in. This is an
yeah.
open marketplace. Whoever wants to influence our election can just start buying ads. Like it's not hard to get a piece of the action. So on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, this feels really rough, and there's a lot at stake. And then I also try to think about, like, well, how wide is the aperture, right? What do we think of as the time we live in? Is it this year? Is it 5 years before this, 5 years forward? Is it the time of our grandchildren? Is it the time of my grandparents?
I really, at some point, I feel like we need to organize and chart our journey over these last, let's say, 4 years, light bulbs that came along the way, because it's all now starting to make sense as to like, why this, why that, and like, oh my gosh, it's just been really extraordinary. And I feel like I'm kind of just having this amazing spiritual connection times, and I'm so grateful. It wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for your crazy, rebellious, heretic ass. In fact, that's a good segue to say this. Y'all might get tired of hearing me say it, but if you haven't already, if you're listening to this, you're enjoying it, you're finding like, hey, I'm getting something out of it, definitely share it with other people. 1, 2, make sure you're subscribed. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed on our website, evangelicalish.com. You're going to get emails that let you know when we might be doing some things, when our times change, special times, one-on-one with Paul, whatever. So please do make sure that you've subscribed. And for those of you that this is really just a good alignment for, and you're like, yeah, I believe in these people and I believe in what they're doing, then help us out and support. It's $5.99 a month. And believe it or not, a little tiny bit like that goes a long way. And if, we need another couple hundred people to do like $5.99 a month.
It really does help. And
it makes a huge difference. And also there's just something powerful about, if you believe in something, being able to put a little bit of money towards it. I think there's something like a really cool connection that happens there. So do please consider supporting us.
What do we mean by the world we're living in? Like, what's the clock? And you brought up the Aztec ruler that encountered the Spanish. At the time of the Spanish invasion of the New World, the crown was expelling Jews from Spain. And Mexico just elected its first woman president who was also Jewish, right? So it's like, that's a 500-year window, right?
Wow.
So are we playing a long game? Or are we playing a 5-week game? Like, what's the aperture? So I think about that a lot, because I feel like many of our challenges are they're intergenerational, right? And so I think we have to kind of create channels of activity where we can respond and do things that are positive for our communities and help people, I feel like there's a lot of anger, you know, and again, you can gin that up, but some of it's authentic. But it definitely has a brand, you know, and I think people are feeding into that in a way that's not, you know, productive politically, because I don't think we've been super productive politically for the last, you know, couple of cycles here. And as a Gen Xer, I'm just like exhausted by boomers. I'm just exhausted by having to live in that world. I feel like we need to help millennials into the process, and we need to do our job and get an at bat here. So I also think about just the generations kind of colliding. So to answer your question, you know, it's like, is there rule of law in the United States? There still is, you know, that's worth fighting for. That's worth protecting. And I don't have absolute faith that it's impenetrable, you know, like it might be on the ropes, depending upon any outcome, right? And I think the other thing I really do worry about is not so much civil war as just political violence, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And where we've seen
chaos,
sort of,
maybe. Yeah.
well, it's like we're a huge country. Most people want to get their kids to school and get gas and go to the grocery store. Like, you know, people keep quoting the Civil War, but there's 40% of the U.S. economy is not willing to start buying guns to shoot the other 60%, right? Like, I don't see people wanting to kill each other, except if you have political violence, which I think is highly probable at this point, and we don't really know what to do with that. Like, I don't. What do I do? Like, what does the average person do to respond to political violence? Which is why I think January 6th was so disorienting for folks, right? Because you could see a lot more of that, but with worse outcomes than even that, which was pretty terrible.
Yeah. So follow up on, like, let's imagine for just a second, let's imagine a second Trump term. And, you know, everyone's talking about how he's not going to have the guardrails because, like, any of the institutionalists who went in with him last time, they're not going to do it second time. And now we've got the Supreme Court that we've got. So while there might be, and I do think there are still guardrails in the judiciary and, you know, and in the, what is the word? Decentralized governance that we've got across the country.
Yeah.
Like that's obviously guardrails, but, do you, like, I have to say a lot of times when I hear his stuff, I do think it's a bit of like showing off and like blah, 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 and just kind of like appealing to that brand, into whipping those people up. But do you think he really would try to, like, be a dictator on day one and all these things that, you know, I guess maybe I'm a little sensitive to being told I have Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, how much of this do you think is real that you hear in his rhetoric these days? Like, you know, 60 minutes to be off the air and all that kind of stuff.
I think that you have to listen to what people say, you know. I also feel like it's a lot of messaging and marketing, you know, and this is not somebody who is an actual fighter, right? Like, this person didn't serve in the military and I don't think has ever been in a fist fight. Like, but there's a lot of people who could be triggered and propelled, right, in a way that is hard to control. You know, could you reseed, you know, this enormous bureaucracy called the federal government with loyalists? Sure, that could happen. And if you look at, you know, governments that have been more autocratic, that's exactly what happens, right? That's how you sort of manage favors. But, you know, the U.S. democracy requires constant vigilance, and it has always been imperfect, right? So I think that what we're ignoring is that there are, you know, hundreds of millions of us who want to live in a free civil society, right? And I could pinch my nose and have somebody in the White House that I don't agree with politically and wait my turn 4 years from now, I'll vote for somebody else. I think most of us don't want to live in chaos, right?
Yeah.
As much as it's tempting to take the bait on that. That being said, it's easy, you know, once you start going downhill and you're picking up speed, you know, will the brakes work? That's a question we have to ask ourselves.
That's it. You know, I think all the time, I love that, that word picture, you know, when you're coming over the grapevine, for those of you who have ever driven like straight up from Southern California to Northern California. And there's this point where it's like they have the runaway truck ramp and it's like, first it's the gravel, then it's the,
Then it's the
guardrail, then it's
elevation, yeah.
the elevation,
And then you're
and
just launched. Then it's a full launch. If you cut through all that, forget it.
then you got the barrels of water, and
Yeah.
then if you're still going, like, you're just gonna kind of go over. So I always think about that visual of like, okay, we're in like definitely in the gravel right now, and like
Yeah.
we've got a couple more things, but just like thinking about
We need to throw a few more trash cans in the way. And
that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
and it's
because-
also like, but you have to, like, the thing is, it might be too late by the time you get to the gravel pit, because other
Yeah.
things are going to go wrong, right? It's not just
Yeah.
your brakes, your steering, right? You
Yes.
might lose it, right? Like the radio might break and you don't know what's happening. So I think we have to not catastrophize, right? And again, we got to wake up the day after the election. Like, what's the 48 hours after the election?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the 12 weeks between the election and a new administration?
Yes.
And there's a lot of variables out here that I think that certain forces win if they narrow down what we are trying to consider here, right? Like, we're worried about everything, but what do we really need to consider?
Yes.
Right. Like, will there be enough, whoever wins, will there be enough like infrastructure in terms of like police and National Guard in DC on inauguration day, right? On the certification day, right? Whoever wins, I'm saying this, whoever wins, right? You could have some violence break out at various state houses, given the sort of ratcheting up, right, of the rhetoric around, voting in many states. You also have a lot of disenfranchised voters out there who are under enormous restrictions and just trying to exercise their rights, So it's like, there's a lot to try to pay attention to, right?
Right.
And I feel like it's like we need to put the country into a really good emergency hospital setting. You need lots of specialists, lots of nurses. You need the security guard at the waiting room. You need toilet paper in the bathroom for the family. Like, you need a lot. A lot needs to get dealt with.
Yeah.
So I think wherever people can come in and take their piece of it, now's the time.
Go ahead. Ash.
Hon. Well, I was going to say, like, sorry, real quick, and I know, I'm like dominating the time here, but
Get in there.
last show or the show before, I can't remember. We brought up John Delaney, horse in the hospital. So if you haven't seen that bit, I mean, that's exactly when you described the like, everyone get ready for triage, and then also watch John Delaney's comedic bit on horse in the hospital. It's like so dead on. But two follow-up questions, and then I'll stop, Paul, and you jump in. But so when you think about, because I think a lot about this, like, okay, sort of who's standing which posts, who is in charge of what, again, decentralized everything. Like, I imagine at the, whatever, it's DNC or, the Harris campaign, there is like a person that is in charge of making sure every lawyer that can possibly be enlisted to protect the, local various swing state elections, like those folks in the hundreds, if not thousands, they're ready like right now, or they're getting ready right now.
Yeah.
Like, you can imagine the political side of it, but who is centralized that is thinking about safety? I mean, I guess it's governors and, town administrators are thinking about like local law enforcement and National Guard kinds of decisions, right?
Well, sheriffs are having to arrest people right now who are taking shots. Somebody was arrested, I think, yesterday, who had been attempting violence in Phoenix, or in suburban Phoenix metro area, right, against a polling place or one of the DNC offices, right? Like, you've got a layer of unstable people who will get triggered into doing, violence or attempting violence. That's one piece. Then we've got, how do you manage a mob? If it shows up in your town, what's the responsibility of free people if a mob tries to like take over the government? What do you do then? But then I like your layout here, Ashley. It's like, where are the lawyers, right? Where are the judges who are going to hear these cases, right? Like, where are the journalists who are going to cover the stories? Where are the faith-based institutions, temples, churches, right, that are going to have conversations to say, again, we can withstand 4 years of distaste, right? We can't stand 4 years of complete melting down as a civil society, And there's a lot of folks who would love to see the United States melt down, obviously.
And it's what worries me the most about it is, I mean, I don't think Trump is a strong man. I don't think he's necessarily evil. I think he's just a little boy in need of attention, really. But it makes him dangerous because, he's incompetent and he basically is in favor of whatever the person in front of him is saying, so he can get that person to call him sir. That's all he really wants. And so if he loses the guardrails of competent, normal people around him, and even if we have good, like what happens this time if he's in office and we have good judges that makes good rulings and he says, nah, I disagree and
Yeah.
refuses to comply? Like, what do we do then?
Well, I mean, there's famous sort of moments in history where presidents did refuse to enforce, Supreme Court decisions. We know that, and it led to terrible tragedies. I have a lot of faith.
If I can interject, we had Howard Baker going to Richard Nixon and saying, dude, you got a problem. We don't have that guy anymore. Those guys are all gone now. We just have Marjorie Taylor Greenes on the Republican side now.
Well, but let's take it from the other side, right? Like, I believe that the men and women serving in the U.S. Armed Forces believe in this country and took an oath to serve the Constitution. Would they act against their fellow citizens in a way that was blatantly unconstitutional?
Right.
Like police officers, right? Like, I believe that the men and women serving as police officers, those persons, took an oath to serve. And again, imperfect. And there's a spectrum of humans in there. But I think that if the thought exercise is like, how bad could it get, right? I think that the thing that I would worry about more is that we take something which has for 200 plus years managed general forward progress, imperfect, but general forward progress, and turn it against itself.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing that I worry about more, actually.
Yeah. And that's actually that's the Titanic, right? That's the like sinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of folks, obviously, in the geopolitical space who would love to see a weaker United States. Right. So again, it's like, what do we need to do to retrofit? Right. We need to install more sprinklers, obviously, if a fire starts. But again, imagine an alternate outcome. If Harris wins, right, how do you govern in this environment, right? Where there may be like a never-ending spate of actions, some legal, some extra legal, to try to destabilize her administration. We have to also contemplate that.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned that the Democrats had 4 years to try to put in some legal guardrails, and they did some. I don't think we can see necessarily a January 6th exactly. I think they've kind of legislated that out. And so that's helpful.
When you say legislated, do you mean prosecuted?
No, they actually changed the law. So specifically now the vice president cannot legally say, no, I don't accept the certification.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what else did they change? Before, you had to have one senator and one congressional representative to dispute a state's certification. Now it takes a lot more. I don't remember how many they put in. It's going to take like 20 of each or something like that. So they did change that process to make it highly more ceremonial.
We would hope we're not there. And again, there is a scenario where we're not, right? Like, one could win. The majority of people on the other side could decide, I'm kind of exhausted. I'm not going to like feed this fire anymore. Let's just move on. Right. Like, at some point the hangover kicks in and you're like, enough, So I don't know what the odds of that are, but that's another piece of this too, right? Is that at some point people might get exhausted enough to be like, I just don't want to hear this stuff anymore. It's been going on for we're like in year 10 of this same cycle.
Right.
I see Kevin Bacon from Animal House, if you've ever seen that, when all is well, all is well, as everybody, as the parade runs.
Well, and I'm like, come on, let's give the 40-year-old a chance to do something with the place. Okay. It's like, enough already. Like, let's get some new people moved in and see what they do with it.
Let's talk about the role of journalism. And I'm just curious, imagine that you were the, I don't know, news director or assignment editor for like the New York Times. How would you be covering where we are right now? I'm sure you see everything that's going on out there and all of that. Like, is there a story angles that you think the national press is missing?
Well, I think, yeah, there was an op-ed in the Times today that argued, the disproportionality of young women supporting Harris is actually a much bigger story than young men supporting Trump, right?
Interesting.
Like,
Okay.
it's just orders of magnitude more extreme in terms of
Wow.
how it
Wow.
weighs,
Uh-huh.
And we have seen certain things like a decline in community colleges, for example, in California, a decline of male enrollment, right? And so something's going on here, right? Again, who's best to solve this problem, right? The administration of the K-12 school districts that feed into the community college in your part of the state, or somebody in the White House? Honestly, it's like,
Yeah.
I almost feel like we've trained ourselves, and this goes back to the Cold War, where like the country stood against communism, right? We're in a nuclear stalemate. And so everything channeled through the White House, right? Like everything was in DC. And really, it's like we have to take more responsibility for what the hell's going on,
Yep.
honestly. So I'd love to see journalists really focus in on who fights the hardest to participate in the process,
Mm.
right? Who is the most rigorous debater, right? Who is going to, again, if you're the senator, whoever wins in Texas, right? You have millions of people who didn't vote for you. Show me something. What are you going to do for the people who didn't vote for you, right? And I'm almost dying for somebody to show up, and I think this is going to be generational, right? Because we're too trained up in Gen X. We look north to the boomers. I want somebody who just doesn't believe this is the way it needs to be.
Mm.
Honestly, just doesn't believe it has to be this way. Starts telling a different story, and that story can win. It might take another generation for it to win, but a new narrative will win.
Mm.
Oh,
So
that's
you'd
interesting.
be interested in like trying to find that thread now. Like
Give me
it's
those
got to be
people.
out there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, give me those people right
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
And if something really terrible happens, those are also the people who are going to hold the line in each community, right? It's like I want to find the religious leaders who refuse to let their congregations fracture, right?
Mhm.
We've had whole churches splitting, right? Like look at the Methodists. So I want to hear from leaders who say, however extreme and polarized we may be, right? It's like our job is to find a way to keep these connective tissues because if we don't, we know what happens. Like things fall apart.
And part of that is a shared space of information. And I know this is what you've been working on diligently for
Well, and I'm like,
the
let's
past
not
few
give this
years.
up, guys. I mean, the United States invented the First Amendment, right? Do you like
Right.
religious freedom? Do you like the free press? Do you like the ability to say what you want? It's like we are unique on the planet for having invented that and sticking them all together, right? So I don't come from a religious background at all. I grew up totally secular, but I would love to have folks in the religious community and folks in the creative community and journalists see each other as necessary allies, right? Because the first thing, I worry less about the Second Amendment. Nobody's coming to get all the guns out of the United States.
Right.
Give me a break. Who would do it? But worry about the First Amendment, right? Because that's the one where you could start to kind of dilute it. You could start to peel it away, right? And this thing that has been the one enabling factor, I think, for our, again, democracy to kind of move in a forward direction, that's not guaranteed. Okay, like that's not guaranteed behaviorally. Like that could get diluted rather quickly.
How do you think journalism has operated in this election season, and maybe particularly when we think about the use of sort of niche media with Trump going on these sort of right-wing bro incel podcast, or
Yeah.
Joe Rogan, and Harris has going on the barbershop podcast the other day and call her daddy, and how has journalism worked to help inform the public?
I mean, listen, we're a nutty, humongous country, okay? This is like goes back to freedom of expression. If you want to listen to a 3-hour interview with somebody, knock yourself out. Like you should have the right to do that. I think that working journalists, right, who are paid to cover issues and have an editor, right, who's going to hold them accountable, right? Like a lot of people don't realize there are libel laws, right? You can get sued if you like misrepresent something as a journalist. You have to have insurance, right, for your newsroom or yourself. So there's a great freedom in the US to say you can't certify a journalist. The Supreme Court said anybody can say they're a journalist if they're doing journalism. Again, that's a First Amendment protection. But you then have a responsibility to do journalism. So I do feel like there's been very strong local coverage about the impact of the economy, right? The impact of immigration. Like, there's actually great local coverage about what's happening in immigration. It's not the story we're hearing nationally, right? I've been part of saving a local paper in Aurora, Colorado, the Aurora Sentinel, which is now community nonprofit owned. They had the story from day one that the whole narrative around the Venezuelan gang taking over those apartment buildings was actually not true. And it was fed to some
Wow.
media by the landlord, right, who didn't want to fix up his buildings.
Right.
This is like
Right.
a bum landlord situation, right? And then it got out of hand. And then you had the conservative mayor, right, and conservative city council person who was fanning the flames originally, trying to pull it back because it did not represent
Yep.
the amazing community of Aurora, where, by the way, like, immigrants start businesses in Aurora. They start businesses. They create jobs, okay? And the vast majority of them are doing it legally and in a safe, civil way. Like, it was the exact opposite of who that community actually is. And the local paper had that story from the jump.
How did the local paper, like, would you say that over that cycle, were they like in it, like pushing the accurate reporting? Did they
Absolutely,
end up
yes.
holding that mayor accountable? Like, is
We were
that
the reporters in the city council meetings, reporting on it and reporting on the lives of, like, we actually talked to people who lived in these facilities, in these buildings. They said the gangs aren't the problem. The problem is nothing gets fixed here.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is this is basically not a safe place to live because of the environment. Not the
Yep.
gang wasn't the issue.
Yep.
It's
And that
just-
did eventually surface. I mean, we heard about it national news. So like that frontline local
And it tells the
reporter.
story, though. This is where at some point we've seen people can just disconnect from the reality, right?
Right.
And this is where journalists can't solve for somebody who doesn't believe in the possibility of a fact, right? Who refuses to understand verifiable information as a concept, right?
Right.
So if we're moving into a political environment or an information environment where verification, professionalism, right, like journalistic standards don't matter, then I mean, welcome AI. I mean,
Yeah.
start hallucinating now. It's fine.
Because I deal with people on a regular basis who believe Haitians are eating cats in Springfield, Ohio, who believe Joe Biden never talked to the governor of Georgia, despite the Republican governor of Georgia saying he did. And that Democrats started, created the hurricane. I mean.
But Paul, let me ask it differently, right? Like if and again, I grew up totally secular, but if you were in a Christian, faith, if you were in a church, and you started making up parts of the Bible, somebody would call you out on it, right?
Theoretically, yes.
You're just like, hey, what about this part of the Bible where this happened? You're like, that's not in the Bible. Like, sorry,
maybe not a good example.
Not
Joaquin.
Because people believe some pretty crazy stuff. But
let's pick another faith tradition, and then maybe
different faith. I'm just saying, like, it's like there's a breadcrumb trail here. Okay, like just like you can actually, like, it's not that hard to ask a reporter how they did a story. They would love to tell you.
And we were talking about this the other day on the podcast here. Like, call your county elections office and ask, how do you verify that the vote is legit? Or call your local school. Yeah, call your local school and say, do you have any kids using kitty litters in their classroom? Actually try to find out if this is actually.
Don't even ask, but there is reporting on these things. There's great local reporting about the Haitian immigrants in Ohio. Right. And there are challenges on some level. Right. But they're opening shops. They are renting houses that were unrented. Like, they are starting to refuel that economy in a way that it has been covered by local media.
By the way, one more thing, Ashley, I wish one reporter, when Donald Trump says, Republican, Democrat, they all wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned and sent back to the states. Would somebody, just one journalist, say, name one of those Democratic lawyers that wanted Roe v. Wade overturned? Can you tell us one? The name of
one follow-up question.
Just give us a name of one, or give us the name of 5 good attorneys that told you they wanted this overturned, because I can't find any Democratic lawyers who say that. Give us the name.
But when you're already going in that direction and you don't feel the need to stay rooted in what we can know as of facts, right?
Right.
And again, a form of journalism invented by the United States, fundamental to our ability to make forward progress, right? If you're going in that direction, it's all about raising the stakes, right? You have to constantly raise the stakes. And this is a playbook that goes back to the McCarthy era. It's like you never apologize, you always escalate, right? It's
Yeah.
very simple, which is
Yeah.
why it's getting more extreme the closer we're getting to the election.
Yeah.
But it was just a little bit fun to see that great journalist Joe Rogan at least say to Trump, "So when are you going to bring all this stuff out? You know, all this stuff that happened. When are you going to bring?" And it stopped Trump in his tracks. He was like, he had no answer for it.
Yeah,
So at least there was that. And then Rogan said a whole bunch of shit that wasn't true. But at
I walk
least
around
that
the
one
corner
moment.
this morning. It's Sunday morning. It's our, kind of like in our household, we try to have, a little bit of like quiet and sort of our Sunday morning, whatever, spiritual
Our own
practice,
version of church.
our own version of it. We're going to have our coffee. We're going to like be contemplative, whatever. I walk around the corner and Paul's got Joe Rogan like blaring in his office. Plus he's like watching, videos on his phone and he's got Rogan over here. And I'm like, what is happening right here?
Yeah.
He's like,
juxtaposition.
But just a like little snippet of the difference between needing to win something in the court of public opinion where, you can kind of say anything, First Amendment, and then versus in a courtroom. When I served in local government, probably 90% of the like big issues that we needed to get decided for that forward progress that you're talking about happened in our council chambers. So that was the world of, given the vote, 4 or 5 of 7 people at any given time needed to agree on a thing. And you knew how to maneuver those people. And it was like conservative talk media for some people and, Latina press for this. I mean, you just, you're constantly trying to like make these folks for a minute be influenced in a manner where they'll agree with what you're trying to say. So 90% of the time, that's what we were doing. And definitely the case that like facts were certainly not being considered. We tried to inject that quite a bit and we had a pretty good legislative body. So I'm gonna say overall, I think, like we were able to do that. 10% of the time we had some very big issues that were resolved by judges.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know it was like heaven on earth when we had to be in a courtroom versus in our council chambers? Because you could make the case and facts mattered and you just could pound like this. And I'm telling you, the difference between, objective, rational, evidence-based decision-making versus trying to spin and maneuver people to like get their constituents to be okay for a second. So think about it was night and day difference. And it's exhausting. And it's just like, if our communities, our neighborhoods that, represent these council members or like hold these council members accountable, if they're not caring about this kind of stuff, then those council members certainly aren't going to.
Well, it's easy to like give that power up, right? The power to do analysis, form an argument, go advocate, compromise, get your win, right? Sometimes you can be totally right. Like I'm picking this and this is the winner. Other times it's like, let me get 50% of mine and 50% of yours, right? This is how we live in a civil society. But data driven, let me just like bring up something that we're on the cusp of, right? It's like our grandchildren will live in a world that is dominated by machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? Think about the number of functions today that anybody like us or anybody listening to this did, which were tracked, right? By your phone, by your networks, by all of the security apparatus in any community in the United States. Like, think about all of the commerce that you've done on Amazon. Think about what it knows about. Think about what Amazon knows about you.
Yeah.
Right. Now add
and
10
TikTok.
years. Add 10 years. Yeah. Right. Add social media. Right. So if we're comfortable letting go of the facts, there's something that is happy to be the one providing all the facts because it's watching us every single day. Right.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, what's the aperture? Are we worried about the next 10 weeks? Are we worried about the next 10 years? Are we worried about 100 years?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are we responsible for right now? And how do we make the best decisions right now? We would zoom out even further, right? If you think about what is available, right, online about you, not even on the dark web, right?
Yeah.
So that's one layer. Then think about all the things that have been hacked and stolen, which is many things. Like, how many times have you gotten an alert? Your account's been compromised. Like everybody's social security number out the window. Ransomware, anybody who's got resources can pretty much, in my opinion, pay to get access to many things. And there are lots of technologies. If you, again, read journalism, lots of technologies available that governments do pay for. But like the idea that somehow, right, you're living in this clean environment, right, where nothing is ever going, like, it's an absurdity. In fact, the opposite is true. We should assume, right, that whatever compromise there is to have, people have it. Right.
Yeah.
Which is, again, why I think politically, this is one of the challenges. And I really do think it's just a challenge. How do you do this with 300 million people in a country? Right. Is building up political leaders, right, who stay totally accountable to the communities they serve. At some point, you have to flip into being a fundraiser. At some point, you're running, Kamala Harris is running $1 billion, a 3-month startup with $1 billion+ to spend.
Right.
How is this politics? How is this politics? Right.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like we create the need for this sort of national sort of narrative without really recognizing what it means, you know, to maintain those connections and that authentic, accountable relationship to where you're coming from. It's like at the end of the day, you end up representing two sides, which are an abstraction of what is actually going on in the country.
So we got to get the money out. We got to get the money out of politics. And but you know what it makes me think of, and you don't have to necessarily comment on this individual instance, but it makes me think when we go like, why would Ted Cruz bow down to a man who called his wife ugly and said his dad killed John Kennedy?
What else going on there?
And it makes me say, what leverage does Trump have on him? You know what?
Well, I don't think he needs leverage. I think Ted Cruz, like any husband, again, I'm not advocating this, but you could just punch somebody who was talking that kind of trash. I'm like, what's a guy in Texas to do? If somebody's literally talking trash about your partner. But again, it's like, once you let that narrative into the politics, once that's the kind of like trash talking, you're just debasing people, right? You're bringing people down into the gutter, right? You're authorizing, right, the worst tendencies in people, right? Rather than saying, we're going to leave that behind, right? But we've seen a lot of this.
Yeah.
Right? Think about the language that's getting used. It's like, what person would want their child to speak in these terms in any public forum, let alone this one?
This is like question 1B or C, and then I still have another question that I want to make sure we talk a good amount about local journalism, what you got going on with that. But can you say a little bit about just the whole shit show that is regulating / not regulating social media? What is that debate? What do you think is a common sense approach there? Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I think that, you know, again, this is one area where I think conservatives and liberals, like everybody could probably get behind some Section 230 reform, right? Like when the Telecom Act was passed that created this sort of, you know, protection, right? It was the right call at that time, not knowing what was going to happen. But why would you leave it alone for 30 years? I mean, we know what the harms are. Right. We know what the harms are. And not having accountability structures built in means we're divorcing ourselves from the need to govern ourselves. So anybody can just show up and do anything if it's on social media, and that's really okay. So I think this is a space where, again, certain states, and I'd love to see a whole spectrum of political, environments come to the same conclusion, which has been brewing, right? Is that we need common sense regulation of these platforms, because the unfettered ecosystem that we have right now is producing an enormous amount of harms.
Did the Dems do something hinky with social media around the 2020 election?
No, I think if you want to influence social media, you just pay for it. Like, it's not hard. None of this is a conspiracy. You just buy an ad.
Money in. Money in.
I don't know. Trump was
but this is, again, like, if people want to fear something, right, add 10 years to what technology knows about your daily lives. Forget your political persuasion. Add 10 years to where we are right now.
Do you think California?
Like when I go to Lowe's and buy a light bulb, and then I come home and there's nothing but light bulb ads on all my social media.
Well, but also your light bulb will be on Wi-Fi. Your light bulb is on Wi-Fi right now, so you can change the color temperature.
Yeah. Do you think California has any chance of doing some kind of like rational, smart social media regulation? Would you see our state doing that?
I do think there's a chance. I don't know if this administration will be the one to do it. And again,
Right.
I think it's a different generation needs to step up on this issue.
Yeah.
You know, like we're seeing it through the prism of all this growth that happened over the last 30 years, 28 years. And I think if you're Newsom, we have 7 times the tech sector jobs as Texas, who's in second place,
Yeah.
right? So you don't see like nobody's really like if you talk oil and gas in Texas, they're like, no, we're going to keep doing this while we invest in renewables. Like you don't give up the lead, and I think that that's a fair thing to say. At the same time, we have gotten cars to be a lot safer. We have gotten cigarettes out of general public consumption through public health, right? And people learning. I don't want grandma to die when she's 60. Like I'd rather have grandparents. So we've made a lot of progress, and I think California, again, I take a lot of pride in our courage and our willingness to be in front on certain things. I think that we could be more strategic about building some partnerships state to state, But yeah, I think we have a wonderful chance to do it, and I think it's our job to do it. I just think it's going to take somebody, maybe one generation younger, middle-aged millennials, let them take it on. But they got my vote.
Yeah. So close us out with just what you would want folks to know about this movement to save local journalism. How can folks get involved? Like you're literally one of the nation's leading experts on this and like on the front line in some very specific ways and very specific communities. Share what you want on that point.
Well, I really do believe strongly in what the Constitution is and what it has enabled, right? And it is extraordinarily flawed. It had codified slavery, right? We had to get a lot out of it, and we had to fix it, and we had to evolve it, which is all in the original, right? This was in the original algorithm that the writers of that Constitution developed. So, if we want to govern ourselves, then we have to be able to do the kind of local, state, national, regional, topical journalism that provides information to people to make decisions. And journalism has always had political camps. It was highly polarized for years. It's had all the things, but journalists are like plumbers, right? They know how to do certain things, right? And if anybody wants to learn it, it's learnable. You can learn to be a plumber. You can learn to be a journalist. So if we don't want to forsake what the First Amendment means, and again, I think unlikely allies here, right? The creative community, the faith-based community, and journalists should form new kinds of relationships, because this will be the first thing to go, right?
Yeah.
If you believe either side, like this is the end times, whoever wins here, if it's not my person, the first thing to go in any scenario where our freedom goes down is the First Amendment protections that we depend on.
Yeah.
And you have to use it or lose it. So do journalism, read journalism, or lose it.
It's such an interesting point. You're the first and only person I have heard make that point, which is there are all these people out there who are so concerned about their religious freedom and their ability to say whatever they want on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night or whatever. And the what gives them protection is the same protection that gives us freedom of the press and like religion and press. That is not
freedom of
something most
expression.
people.
Yes.
It's such a powerful point. I hope people will pick up on that. And,
lots of communities have been persecuted in the United States, right? And they have had to do many things to protect themselves, right? It goes back to that First Amendment. Again, I think the Second Amendment, who's touching that? Come on. Right. Nobody's going to get all the guns out of the U.S. It's not going to happen. The First Amendment, this is what I actually feel is most at risk.
Yeah.
You really don't believe in the freedoms of the American Constitution if you're not willing to fight for somebody who disagrees with you to be able to say
that's absolutely right.
What they want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. In public forums, around each other, in legislative bodies.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, the gamble is that we can actually do this, right? But anybody who tries to dissuade us from the validity of this model, from the power of this model, doesn't want to hear it, doesn't want the debate.
Right.
The spiritual part of me would say it is only possible when you have value for another human life, which for so many people, like that gets grown in us through our religious or faith-based kinds of upbringings. And so to see the sort of organized institutional religious faith-based leaders being the ones who are assailing when they actually hold, help cover the flame that is necessary for this kind of interaction with human beings who are very different in a lot of ways. Like, to me, I've said this on our show a lot, like, democracy to me is the best reflection and spiritual practice that I can think of in this lifetime. It's the ability to hold a democratic society together. To me, that is more Christ-like than anything else I ever saw on a Sunday in my entire life going to church.
And we have depended on religious communities to make the Constitution true, right? Go back to the civil rights movement, right? Like it's taken, this has been a force for good in so many respects. And the day's coming again. I'm sorry. It's like the phone's going to ring. It's like time to step up. I do think though, like, let's start lateraling to millennials. Let's bring up this next generation. I think we're stuck in the sandwich, guys, Gen Xers. Yeah. It's just terrible. I mean, it's horrible. So yeah, we got the Cold War. Now we got
we never had our moment, did we?
We get to complain though. We do get to complain.
Let me say, I think holding the door open is our moment. I think actually, we're the hinge that history swings on. Is we're so impacted by the boomers in good ways and in bad ways, and we're like, we are the ones who have the front seat to know, like, oh shit, we need something different. And our pivot is, I think, what makes this, next generation of leadership possible. So it's a huge responsibility.
And by the way,
problem.
There is biblical language for this, Christian biblical language. And I'm learning that also other religions have good language, but Jesus not only said, love your neighbor as yourself, but then said, and your neighbor includes those people that you don't think worthy of love, and said, if you only love those who love you, how are you any better than the worst people in culture? They love people who love them too. And if you only love those who love you, you're no better. You're no better than them.
That's, to me, that's like the underpinning. I mean, again, you could find that same expression in other world religions, but that's the underpinning of a free and democratic society to me.
That's civil society right there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Joaquin.
Gosh, this was fun. We could keep going for a long time.
And I'm gonna say, dude, top 3. Your top 3, man.
Get me back in that top 3. But I need a little alert. I need like a message alert if I'm slipping.
You're moving up in the rankings after this. After this,
definitely top 3, and so grateful. And like the other 2 are like not people that I could like text and be like, "Hey, can you come on our show?" Like, I have had one conversation with Barack Obama. I'm thinking he's not coming on ish. But Joaquin
keep it going though. Just keep going. Forward motion.
I like it. I
love it. And you've made me think like, okay, those of us who can keep our heads over the next month must keep our heads over the next month.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And for folks who may want to get in touch with Joaquin, he has let us know we can share his email address. So it's Joaquin at studio2be.com. We can put that in the show notes. Joaquin at studio2be.
And that's studio TOBE.
Yes.
Is it TOO or T? It's just TO.
TOB, to be or not to be, Paul. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Studio 2.
That is one of the questions, at least. Okay. Thank you, guys.
We'll see you, Joaquin. Thank you. All right. Yeah, that was interesting. I'm encouraged by that. And well, maybe I have something I planned for what's on my mind, but I will just say I was listening to a through line from NPR podcast today, and they were talking about how we've had attempts at voter suppression in the past that sound very similar to what we might see here in the next couple of weeks. And sometimes it's discouraging to think we're still there, but it's also encouraging to think we've survived this before.
Yeah.
And maybe with diligence, we can't depend on what has happened in the past, but we can see that with diligence, we can survive it again.
I totally agree. I feel encouraged. I take courage from hearing about the nastiness of 100 years ago. That's why I like Rachel Maddow's like prequel and prequel and what are her podcasts? Oh, anyway,
what's it called?
Yeah, well,
it's not Slow Burn.
No, but just basically her content, looking back, like deep dives in American history, is like very, very encouraging to me to know like these are threads. I don't know if I wanted to be really optimistic, I would say like, hey, these kinds of roots were in place a long time ago. It always goes back to racism of some sort. So it's, anti-Semitism, it's, anti-Black. The roots, things get surfaced. There's some kind of, community response. At least this has been our history. They go underground. And here we are having this great reveal, which some say that's what apocalypse means. The great reveal is like,
Yeah.
whoa, there's a lot of this stuff still here festering. Now is our chance to know about it and resolve, maybe, I don't know, hopefully resolve these deep-rooted tendencies in our country.
And that's, you said an interesting thing there, because I learned that in this season, that apocalypse does not mean like end of the world or
Four
a
horsemen.
war
Mhm.
that kills everyone or anything. Apocalypse literally means to be revealed, or
Yes.
things hidden to be revealed. Yeah.
Well, do you
Interesting.
know where I heard that from?
Where?
You.
Yeah. And I heard it from my friend Bob.
So I'm quoting you, and now you're quoting me quoting you.
Yeah.
You're quoting Bob from Bakersfield. So there we go.
All right.
Um,
I know you're what's on your mind. What's on my mind is like a spiritual one, right?
it is today. Yes.
All right. So I'll let you finish us
Got it.
on a big note.
Okay.
Mine's a little bit lighter. Uh, Mine is what I think is the most underrated TV series of all time. It's called Freaks and Geeks. And I mean, look at this picture. The careers that were launched by this series. I don't know if there's ever been a series that launched. So this is like the main character up front, right behind the word freaks. Do you recognize that young
Yes, of course.
woman there?
She's in the Christina Applegate show Dead to Me
Dead to Me.
on Apple TV. We love that.
Linda Cardellini. She was in Mad Men. She was in Dead to Me. She's been in a lot of things. Behind her is James Franco, Seth Rogen, and then Jason Segel, who
Love those
was
guys.
he was in How I Met Your Mother, which is another one of my favorites, and of course he's in Shrinking, which is a series we're enjoying now. So it was just such a great series. It launched all these. It had these amazing, and I could go on. If you look, Shia LaBeouf was in the show. There was just a litany. What's her name? Rashida Jones was in it, and it just launched some amazing careers. And it was just so well done, and it was just a really great series. And it ended after, I think, 3 seasons, and people were so angry that it was taken off the air. But it was back when we only had 3 networks and all of that. But if you're looking for something to watch, do yourself a favor, watch Freaks and Geeks, and just know when you're just really falling in love with it, it's over, because they ended it far too soon.
I'm impressed that you literally had a visual aid for your what's on my mind this week. So you're like, really, this is really on your mind, because you like went to the trouble to like get that and have it ready to go.
Well, because I know how my mind works and I know how yours works. And I was going to mention these actors' names, and
and then
I
I'd be like,
wasn't going to
"Who's
be able to
that?"
tell you who they are.
Yeah.
And you were going to
Fair.
be saying who's that. So I figure if I
That's
gave you
fair.
the picture, that would help.
You do know me. Okay, so are you rewatching it right now? Is that why?
No,
Okay.
I was thinking about it the other day, and I just love that series, and
Okay.
I want people to know about it.
Okay, that was right around the same time when Fred, what's his name, that young guy, had the like After Years or whatever,
Wonder
the
Years.
Wonder
No,
Years.
I think
Because
this
those
came.
shows remind me of each other.
I think this was later than Wonder Years. If
Okay.
maybe not, but I believe so. I believe it was later than Wonder
Got
Years.
it. Fred Savage. I also love Fred
Red
Savage.
Savage, yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
and
so
Winnie.
and Winnie. Aw. What's on my mind is I picked up this book. I probably talked about it on the show before, but I picked it up again this weekend and started reading where I left off, and it was like so moving to me. It's called Wisdom Jesus, by Dr. Cynthia Borgeault, Wisdom Jesus. She is a contemporary of Richard Rohr's. In fact, I think she is like on the same, like in the same place, I guess, in New Mexico that he is. I don't know. But it is, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, all these threads are tying together for me about like the life of Jesus and like how he pursued and modeled consciousness, and like that was the sort of great reveal of his time, that he was focused on like descending to serve and love instead of like the spiritual tradition at the time was like, if you were a holy person, you were like trying to ascend to be like the most spiritual. And in his model was like, no, you give it all. You love generously. You spend time with the tax collectors. You hang out with the prostitutes. Like that was what was so revolutionary.
Mm.
One of several things about Jesus. Anyway, she talks about in this book, like centering prayer. It's just a beautiful blend of like liturgical sort of Eastern Christian, and then stuff that I learned growing up as like a good Baptist kid. And I'm telling you, it's like a spiritual awakening for me, coupled with the other things I've been reading and exploring. So I'm going to just say that's on my mind, and I've loved reading it these last couple days.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so last week, what was on your mind was a different book. So maybe people are wondering, how does your reading process work when you were reading the Yogi Berra book last week? So.
Not the Yogi Berra book, the autobiography of a yogi. Well,
Yeah.
it's related because it's all about this like deep spiritual practice and kind of breaking out of the religious boxes and instead just focusing on this like inner journey. And there's this beautiful line, I should have brought it upstairs so I could read it to everybody, but in Wisdom Jesus, talking about how Jesus showed how to access like the great divine love / consciousness is through this inner pursuit. Well, yogis, that's their thing too, so that's how it all kind of ties. And thank you, Doug, on the left for the reminder. Ren, dear God, let's just put a marker in it right now. That's happening next week. Can we say that, Paul?
Yes,
We're
we can
making a
say
commitment.
that.
And
On Tuesday, our
on
podcast is on Tuesday, which
Tuesday,
we'll talk
we'll talk about
more
that.
about.
So
But where I want to reflect what you're saying is I do, when my Buddhist friend told me, or when I first started making Buddhist friends or friends with people of religion that were not Christian, told me, Jesus was amazing. Jesus was the most enlightened person maybe ever in history. And I was like, you can't say that. You can't steal my Jesus into your religion. It really caused me to start thinking of, well, could we see Jesus in another way than rather he just came to be a blood sacrifice for a bloody religion? That he actually was talking about something different in the idea of salvation that is more focused on being raised up in your identity than being told you're shit and you need a savior. And that's been just life-changing, I
Oh my
think,
God.
for us.
Let's talk about what's coming up on
We're
Tuesday.
on Tuesday. We're live streaming Tuesday this week, not Wednesday. Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific.
There's a good reason why we're going Tuesday, not Wednesday. I'll talk about it in a second, but I want to just pull a thread that Joaquin, when I asked him, if you were covering this election right now, like what would you be putting more reporters on? What's the story that you don't feel like is being told? And he said, the role of young women in this election is by far order of magnitude more of an impact than the role of men supporting Trump. Next week on Tuesday, we have a chance to talk to a person named Liz Erickson. She's with an organization called Supermajority, which is a nonprofit that focuses specifically on connecting with marginalized women, those that are not actively voting or participating in their community, and working with those women to make sure they are showing up so that the presence and the perspective of women is showing up in places of power all across the country. They have a C4 arm that's also involved in the campaign. Liz is on the nonprofit 501c3 side of things. And we're going to hear a bunch of cool stuff from Liz, like from the trenches, the front line of what's going on and working with women across the country in this election season. So that is so exciting. Tuesday at 6.
Nice. And Wednesday night.
So Wednesday night, the reason why we are not going to be on Wednesday night is because there's a really cool event that's happening in our community of Fresno. If you're anywhere in the Central Valley, this might be something that you're interested in. A very famous, nationally famous Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, Maria Hinojosa, who's on NPR. You can hear her show. I think it's called Latino USA. I think it's on weekly. She's joining us in Fresno for a public event at the Tower Theater. It's at 6 p.m. You can learn more by going to Central Valley CF, as in communityfoundation.org. You can sign up. I think there might still be a few tickets left. So Paul and I will be there and listening to Maria Hinojosa on Wednesday of next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. And to all of you listening on the audio pod, we will see you all the next time we're together on Evangelicalish.